I woke up to a chainsaw at dawn, that high metallic whine that puts a cold hand on your spine. And by the time I stumbled outside barefoot with my phone, the 135-year-old sycamore on my property was already trembling. 3 guys in mismatched work clothes hacking at it, while my HOA neighbor Lydia watched from her driveway like a foreman with a clipboard. And 10 minutes later, the crown swung the wrong way and crashed through her roof. By sunset, she served me with a lawsuit. Yeah, that happened. My name is Caleb Mercer. We moved to Pine Hollow, North Carolina for the schools, and the safe cul-de-sacs, and the kind of evenings where your kids ride bikes past porch swings. And for that tree, the keeper, the one my granddad swore shaded this road before any of these houses existed. I had an arborist check it before we ever signed the papers. Healthy, strong, worth protecting. And I believed him. I still do. Lydia didn't. Or maybe she just didn't like anything she couldn't control. Short precision. Bob pastel cardigan. Like armor. Sunglasses even on cloudy days. And that HOA badge that catches the light. The first time she brought up the tree. She stood at a Tuesday meeting and called it a menace debris and blocked views and property values. And I nearly choked on my coffee because I've heard some HOA poetry in my time. But blaming shade for the apocalypse was new. I stood up and said polite. As I could, it's healthy and it's on my lot, and she smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't touch the eyes, and said, "We have standards. You'll comply." After that, the paper parade began a violation for vegetation maintenance, taped to my door, a door hanger, about limb overhang. A newsletter, with my lot number highlighted. Like I'd been caught shoplifting. She'd wander by and narrate rules at me, like scripture. Blowing leaves into the street is not permitted. She'd chirp while I was literally raking leaves away from the curb. I tried, neighborly invited her for coffee. Thought maybe if she saw the tree the way I did, history shade kids reading under it. She lasted 2 sips and said, "Pine Hollow is about order. Caleb, that thing is chaos on a trunk, put in a tasteful fountain." That's the moment I got it. It wasn't safety, it was control. And when people like that can't get their way, they start sharpening their rules. She turned up the pressure, hinted my pool fob could be reviewed. HOA for we can shut you out. Cornered folks at block parties with photos of acorns. Like they were fingerprints from a crime scene. Said squirrels meant infestation, and shade meant mildew, and my sycamore was a ticking time bomb. We made a binder called Lydia's Greatest Hits and laughed about it. But the night she jabbed a finger at my chest by the mail kiosk and said, "If you won't deal with your hazard, someone else will." I should have heard it as a promise, not theater, which is how we got to chainsaws. In blue-gray light and a dented pickup idling at the curb. No permit, no cones, no company. Logo one guy on a ladder leaned at a bad angle, another looping a rope around the trunk and back to the bumper, like he planned to yank gravity into obedience, the third. With a cigarette and a stare, I yelled, "Get off my property!" Now pointed at the little orange stake by the base of the tree. The cutter shouted back, "Ma'am, hired us, and yeah," he said, "ma'am." While standing on my lawn, Lydia lifted her chin and announced for the whole cul-de-sac. The board authorized an emergency response. We documented the hazard, and I said, calmly as I could, "You don't get to call something an emergency because you're tired of raking. Call the police if you want." She smiled, a no smile, and said, "We'll be done." So I did both things at once. I called 911, and I filmed everything. The cut face at the base, the rope to the bumper, the property marker, the lack of a city tag. Neighbors shuffled out in pajama pants and slippers, whispering, "Is this legal?" And then it happened, if you've ever heard a big tree change its mind. You know that groan you feel through your feet. The crown leaned toward her house. The rope snapped like a bat, cracking a fastball, and the roof took the hit. Shingles coughing into the air, a window exploding to glitter. Somewhere inside a low, terrible crunch, when a wall gives up. The chainsaws died, and so did every voice for one long second, before Lydia pointed across the lawn and screamed, "Your tree! Your liability! You're paying for this!" I wish I could tell you I felt triumphant. But what I felt first was grief for the keeper for rings that told a story older than our HOA bylaws. Yeah, I know how that sounds. But the truth doesn't need to shout. It just stands there with sawdust in the grass. Officer Ruiz rolled up lights bouncing red and blue off leaves stuck in her gutters. He looked at my phone, looked at the clean cut at the stump, brushed his finger through fresh sawdust and said, "That's cut, not wind throw." He separated us like a ref in the fourth quarter and asked Lydia about a permit. She paused just long enough to answer the real question. "It was urgent," she said at the board. "A city permit, ma'am," he said. And she had nothing. The city arborist. Dr. Maya Ellison arrived in a khaki shirt, touched the stump like a doctor checking a pulse. Healthy specimen. Deliberate cuts. No storm. This would have required a permit. And she looked right at me with kind eyes and said, "I'm sorry." I nodded and kept filming because past a certain point, evidence is the only language anybody listens to. Here's your twist if you need one. 2 days later, I got served negligence and hazardous tree and emotional distress, a whole parade of big words trying to turn her decision into my bill. And my stomach dropped because lawsuits are built to make you tired enough to cave. But my lawyer, Jordan Pike, the calmest person in any room, said, "Don't settle. We defend and we counter. Trespass, destruction of property, tree valuation. And we let the facts do the lifting." So we did. We requested HOA records using the same clause they quoted us when they want to see your porch. There was no board vote for an emergency removal on my lot. But there was an email from Lydia the night before I am initiating at dawn. "I'll handle it," which is not a policy. That's a confession. We pulled permits from the city. None. We traced the truck plate to a guy with an expired license. Subpoenas went out and under oath, he said. What pictures always force people to say. Lady hired us. Said no. City said, do it early. Before busybodies paid cash. No contract. I wasn't even home. The morning the saws started, and we had the proof. Hotel timestamp gas station receipt. The works. You know what I mean. Court wasn't TV. No soaring speeches, just patient paper. Lydia's lawyer tried to sell a story about community safety and ticking. Time bombs, Jordan stood like a man who enjoys gravity and said, this case isn't negligence, it's trespass and destruction. She hired unlicensed workers to cut a protected sycamore on land that wasn't hers. Without a permit, it then sued my client when the tree fell. Where her rope pulled it, we called Dr. Ellison first. She explained the cut pattern, right down to the kerf. The crew admitted the cash job, and the early start, my foot. My footage showed the property marker, the rope to the bumper, and Lydia in that lemon cardigan. Pointing like a traffic cop, her lawyer tried to pin me with the word hazard, and I said, there was no evidence of danger. I refused bullying, not safety, and when Lydia took the stand, she performed like the room was a stage, sleepless nights, tissues, 100 ways to say I did it for everyone, until Jordan laid the photo in front of her and asked, "Is this you directing the crew?" And she went quiet, where the truth lives, and said yes. No permit, no boundary verification, just certainty and a rope. The judge leaned back steepled fingers and delivered the part where my shoulders finally dropped. "Mr. Mercer, not liable, Ms. Barnes acted without consent, without permits, in violation of city ordinance and HOA bylaws. Judgment for the defendant on counterclaims. Damages $210,000, plus removal and attorney's fees and punitive damages." The gavel tapped. Once the room exhaled like a held breath, and Lydia pointed at me with a look. "People reserve for the person holding the mirror?" "You've ruined me," she said. And I didn't say what I was thinking, which was, you did this to yourself. Life after the gavel isn't a victory lap. It's paperwork. Payment plans. Licensed contractors on her lawn. This time, city letters about mitigation for heritage trees. A quieter HOA meeting where folks finally read the bylaws they wrote, and a backyard where we planted a sapling. Our kids named Second Chance. I kept a slab of the old trunk on hairpin legs in my office, and when emails get loud, I run a finger across those rings and remember that strength doesn't yell. It shows up the same way every year and does its job. People ask if Lydia changed, and I tell them the truth. People who worship control don't swap engines. They downshift the noise. She still files polite complaints, still glares from her porch. Like the son owes her rent when a payment was late and penalties hit. She muttered, "Enjoy your charity." And I said, "Enjoy your forest." And went back to watering the real change happened in me. I stopped confusing peace with appeasement. Boundaries aren't rudeness, they're kindness with a spine. You don't have to scream. You keep your receipts steady. Your allies get your permits in order. Let the facts carry the weight. And when consequences land, you don't gloat. You plant something better and get back to living. Now here's where I want to hear from you, because this part always splits a room. Did justice get it right, or did a neighbor simply get crushed under rules she thought she owned? How far do you go with a person who makes their emergency your responsibility? Meet them halfway for the sake of the street, or draw a bright line and let gravity sort it out. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop your experience with an HOA power trip or any clipboard in your life. Boss, relative, you name it. And if you want more real stories with receipts, subscribe and ring the bell. Around here, we plant boundaries and let karma handle the pruning.